Hello, my name is John Brink, and we are podcasting from downtown Prince George on the Brink, and we have a very, very special guest today. It is the Mayor of Mackenzie, and her name is Joan Atkinson. Welcome to the show, Joan.
Thank you very much, John. I'm very excited to be here and have the opportunity to have this important discussion with you.
Yes.
And I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming from the traditional territory of the McLeod Lake Indian Band. Mackenzie sits in the traditional territory of MLIB, so I want to make that land acknowledgement.
Sure. And thank you for being here, Joan. And and I'm very pleased to have you as well here as a guest. Now, for those people that we have a lot of people watching internationally. Mackenzie is about how many kilometers north of Prince George?
It's about 190.
Yeah,
yes.
about close to 2 hours
yes.
drive.
Depending on the weather, a little bit more extra time this time of year, but
yeah. And it's a smaller community, right?
Currently, I think we sit at about 3,700 people.
Yeah.
In the late 80s, we were up to about 6,000, and
wow.
Of course with mechanisms in mills and progress, were less workers needed, so
right.
That the employment has shrunk, but it is still the major economic driver in our community.
Yes, and you came to Mackenzie 1997 in that area?
That's correct. I grew up in Northern Ontario.
Okay.
Spent from 84 to 97 in 3 locations in Manitoba. My husband was a forester with the Manitoba government and the Ontario government. He wanted an opportunity to work for private industry before he retired, so came out in 97 to work for Finley Forest Industries, which is now Conifex.
Conifex, yeah. And then you also worked in the forest industry, right?
Well, I've been a bureaucrat my entire working career, so I've worked for the provinces of Ontario, Manitoba, British Columbia, and the federal government. So I'm very comfortable in that regulated environment, and recognize challenges that bureaucrats have getting their jobs done.
Right.
But I think one of my biggest aids in my life as a mayor is that my husband and both my sons are directly involved in the industry. So we grew up around our dining room table talking about, silviculture and annual allowable cuts and what recce's were and all that sort of thing. So I have a pretty solid understanding of the industry, and I think as a mayor of a resource-based community, that's my responsibility.
So what is your husband's name?
Jim Atkinson.
And is he retired now?
He is retired. He is the chairperson of our community forest.
Okay.
He was the manager for the community forest before that, and then worked for industry in Mackenzie in the same location, but for different companies as companies were bought and sold.
And you have 2 sons?
I have 2 sons. My oldest son actually works for Industrial Forestry Services here in Prince George.
Yeah, his name is?
Is Nathan.
Nathan?
Yes, Nathan. And my youngest son works for East Fraser Fiber, Parallel 55.
Yeah.
And he is a scaler and a heavy equipment operator in the log yard.
Wow.
So they're not involved in the processing. They're involved in the core forestry operations.
All the things around the industry, right? Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is so you went to Mackenzie in 1997, and then you became politically involved. When did that all happen?
So I ran in a by-election in 2007 because
for council or
for council,
yeah.
for council, and I sat on council until 2018. Yeah. And that was when I ran for mayor. I was actually acclaimed in 2018, and then when I went in for that 4-year term, I thought, well, I'll wait and see where the community is in 2022 to decide whether or not I would run again, because I'm getting a little older, but I just look at people like you, and age doesn't really matter, right? You just keep on ticking.
Yeah, exactly.
So there are so many things right now in play in Mackenzie that haven't been resolved. Certainly the closures we've seen. Right now, our timber supply area is in the middle of a timber supply review.
Yeah.
We are supposedly going to hear what our new AAC is. I've been told as early as the end of January, so I'm very hopeful that that's going to happen, because I think that has to be the first step moving forward, because there's other things, major things happening, like 10-year sales to Indigenous nations.
So just want to talk a little bit more about, because you then decided in 2018, you became, or then you had to make a decision if you would run again, because there was just an election that happened a couple of months ago?
Yes, yes.
October the 15th.
October the 15th.
Yeah, and you were elected again.
So when I took over when I was acclaimed as the Mayor of Mackenzie in 2018, and the former mayor likes to tease me, but I know it's all in jest, that when he was the mayor, no mills shut down.
Right.
And I took over, and 2 of our major mills have shut down under my leadership. Yeah. So I want to fix that before I hang up my hat.
And obviously that brings us to our discussion today, because this podcast in particular, and that's why you are such an important guest for me, is that you're knowledgeable about the forest industry in British Columbia. And this podcast in particular focuses on BC's forest industry and transition. And that means that a lot of things have happened in the last 10, 12 years since the 2020 in that area. And in particular, we have had the beetle pandemic that eliminated probably 60-70% of the pine beetle in the interior of the province. Then we have had spruce beetle, that coming from the Mackenzie region, making its way east around. It's still kind of active now. And then forest fires in 2017 and 18 in particular, that took out a lot of the timber that we are relying on in the province of British Columbia. So we have this amazing province, in my opinion, I'm sure you feel the same, that grows this amazing forest that we have, and as you fly over it, it looks amazing, really. Timber, that is very carefully managed in terms of maintaining, and you made the reference to AAC, that means annual allowable cut. That is a very delicate balance of determining how much fiber can be harvested and still maintaining the sustainable yield going forward.
Exactly.
Then what happened, though, is because of the pine beetle, then the spruce beetle, the fires, and some other things that happened in addition to that. The AAC in the province has gone from normally around 60 million cubic meters annually, lifted up to as high as 80 during the pine beetle to harvest as much of the wood as long as it had economic value, to back to 60, now down to 40, and even somewhat lower than 40 in the province, resulting 35 mills shut down, 2 in your region.
Although our mills are not shut down because of lack of fiber.
Correct.
As I mentioned earlier, we're in the middle of a timber supply review, and the early indications are we are just going to go back to our pre-uplift numbers.
Correct.
So we're up to 4.5 million cubic meters.
Yeah.
It looks like, what I've heard from government, we're going to go back to 3 or maybe slightly below that, and we're good until the next review. So, so we're in a different situation than most communities, is that we haven't run out of fiber. We have lots of fiber, and government has said that to me on many occasions. you have nothing to worry about. When I first was elected mayor, that
Right.
you have a robust fiber supply. Well,
Correct.
that doesn't do much for my community
No.
when those logs are rolling down the highway to be processed elsewhere.
And that's the delicate part of it, right? And that gets to the concept of what I always say, and my friends, the major primaries and around the coffee table, a lot, and I'm a vice chair of coffee, amazingly, but is that I always say that the fiber in this province belongs to you and me, the people, that access to fiber is a privilege, and there are certain social obligations surrounding that.
Which no longer exist.
And that's the troubling part. That is the concept of pertinency, which means the social contract really, in saying that the lumber that is harvested should be manufactured in that particular region. And again, Mackenzie is unique to a certain extent for St. James and other regions potentially.
Yeah.
And so what is happening now is that although throughout the province, a lot of the, the province is divided into areas, they call it TSAs, timber supply areas. The largest ones in the province are Mackenzie and Prince George. Prince George was reduced by a substantial volume. Mackenzie wasn't. Neither likely is the one north of that, even further in Fort Nelson and the other area around Fort St. John. The problem has been that the mills there are no longer operating, and the time that I've been here, Joan, it has gone through Friendly Forest Products. It has been
Donahue, Abitibi Consolidated.
All of those, on and on and on, Canfor, and now, where do you go from here, right? So how do you attract again manufacturing in the region?
Exactly, and it was the right thing to do at the time when the Liberal government removed appurtenancy in the early 2000s, just to accommodate the harvesting of all that infected wood, while it still had some value to it. But there should have been a sunset clause.
Correct.
To have that be put in place forever, that's what's killing small rural communities, is when a large company is awarded tenure, there is a social obligation that you're going to that you're going to support that community, or the communities within that timber supply area. We are the only major one. We do have some First Nations communities, but that's our biggest issue right now. Is we have a healthy fiber supply, and government has. We like to think that it belongs to us, the forests in this province. They don't. They actually belong to the 5 big companies. When you look at it, they're the ones who are running the show. They have, making the big profits, and it just really disturbs me when they're making record profits. 2 years ago, millions and millions of dollars. Now the price of lumber has dropped. So what do? You lay off your employees, and they have to bear the brunt of that. None of them, I'm sure, got bonuses when those companies were making millions of dollars. But
right.
Now when they're not making, it's always the workers that have to bear the brunt of that. And that
right.
has to stop. And so I look at Mackenzie, our largest tenure holder, who holds 1 million cubic meters of wood. They shut down their operation 3.5 years ago, and still hold on to that tenure.
Which company is that?
Canfor.
Canfor, yeah.
Yeah, so there has to be something, and I know government's done a good job engaging all of us about what has to be done, but one of the things that has to be put into legislation, when you are awarded that tenure, you have some obligations that must be fulfilled, and if they're not fulfilled, then that tenure goes back to the government, and they give it to someone that's going to support communities. when the NDP took over in 2017, you know, their mantra was people first, communities first. That hasn't happened. That was nothing but lip service, in my opinion, because we look at where our community is right now. We're in far worse shape than when we were before all these things were going to change. And I know there's been, as I said, lots of engagement. Mackenzie was one of the only timber supply areas. There was 2 of them in the province that formed timber supply area coalitions, and that was on the invitation of Premier Horgan. And it only went out to companies, because I called Victoria and say, why can't my community form a coalition? They said, no, it has to be done by industry. So gratefully, I'm very grateful to Ken Shields, stepped up to the plate. So he and I co-chaired Mackenzie's Timber Supply Area Coalition. We held, I would say, 100 meetings in 14 months. And that was all the major players, Indigenous nations, haulers, loggers, and we met sometimes 3-4 times a week to try and figure things out. So we participated in that. Then the government had the Interior Forest Renewal excuse me, process. We were the second community to host it. Now we have the intentions paper has come out. Last month they've now formed another committee. So I think what frustrates me the most is I appreciate that we were given the opportunity to be part of the conversation. It's time to stop talking and start doing. We are waiting for government to actually put some of these intentions into action. Because if it's intentions mean nothing if there's nothing done about it. So I think that's everyone's frustration, is we're all left in limbo. There's so much uncertainty in the industry that it's killing small communities, and that's my concern.
So if I'm correct then, that I think it was in June of 21 that the Premier then, Joan Atkinson, and the Minister of Forest then, Katrine Conroy, made the announcement of what they call the intentions paper, which was modernizing the industry into an industry of the future. And and there were 3 different parties that endorsed it with it. A person from First Nations, a person from Labour, and a person from industry spoke to it. The one from industry that spoke to it was me. In fact, don't ask me why, but I was the one, and I thought there were others. But anyway, so what I said in that conversation is because I've always been an advocate of we should be doing more with the forest that we have, other than just making dimension lumber. And if we can do further manufacturing of that lumber or of byproducts of that particular process, it should be done here, not elsewhere. And that would be a commitment in that access to fiber is a privilege. It is not, they do not own it, it's a privilege. And if they are not using it properly or not putting as much value into the resource as is possible, then it should be considered that just changes should be made to that. And we do have a value-added company, East Fraser Fibre, Parallel 55 in Mackenzie, which depended on those sawmills running. When Canfor shut down, the outcome of that was the Paper Excellence mill went down because they no longer had any chips. East Fraser's been very loyal to Mackenzie for decades. Right now, they are importing trim blocks from Alberta. We sit on a healthy fiber basket in the Mackenzie TSA, and that value added, and that's government's buzzword, value added. We have to get more. They want that to grow, but you can't grow that unless you give those companies some tenure. It makes no sense. And so what I've said is that the future of the industry, and just talking about Parallel 55, was started by a good friend of mine, Dan Chris Winter, way back in the early 80s, late 70s. And, I started the finger jointing in the province in Canada, actually in 1975. And he built then the plant initially in Mackenzie, did that, and had a chipping plant that had quite a going operation. And then unfortunately...
And they still run a chip plant?
Yeah, and so, and truly a value-added company, right?
Exactly.
So what I've said is that, in my opinion, and I said that during that presentation that we did for the medium, is the then Premier and then the then Minister of Forest, that I believe the future of the industry in the province of British Columbia is that a couple of things are challenges, is that 5 or 6 companies control 75% of the annual allowable cut or the timber in the province. If you control 75%, then factually you control it all, because all the incremental wood will be, they have a distinct advantage over the ones that do not have timber or do not have what they call tenure. Tenure is, it's perpetually the right to cut a volume. That's a position that gives somebody a distinct advantage. For whatever reason they have, a lot of those companies that the big 5 or 6 are public companies, and and did not find it to be competitively to their benefit to operate here and have invested in other places, especially this U.S. Southeast, or in some cases in Europe.
Yes.
So that in being said, that hopefully at some point they will come back to BC and start investing again. Once they do invest, what I've said is that I believe that the future of the industries, the newer mills that will be put into place in the regions will be will be mills that are focusing on different profiles of logs. There will be more technology involved, like electronic, robotics, and everything else, and here is the operative. They will employ even less people than they do now.
Right.
That's the future. And so what I've said is that the future is innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary. And intensive secondary could be secondary manufacturing of lumber. I'm not talking about residuals like chips are residuals, pellets are residuals. I'm talking about lumber. Is that that I believe that the lumber that will be manufactured by the companies, up to 50% of that volume will go up the value chain. The lowest 25% of it and the highest 25%, and it should be done here. And in the province of British Columbia, it can be done here.
And we had a company come to Mackenzie about, I guess it'll be 2 years, January 1st, because that's when the investors came to the community, and the CAO and I met, and they wanted to build a value-added mill. They were willing to actually build a mill. We went to government, and even though the Canfor mill had been shut for more than a year by that time, we were told, well, there's no fiber available. And that was my question to them. Don't be telling us that you want to build a value-added industry when you're not going to support those people who want to have value-added facilities with tenure. You can't have one without the other. And that's what I find most frustrating. And the other thing, you look back the history of Mackenzie. Mackenzie was built as an initiative from Victoria. When the Wacky Bennett Dam was built and they flooded now Williston Reservoir, named after the former minister Ray Williston.
Ray Williston, yeah.
They said, hey, now we have access to all this wood.
Yeah.
Let's build a town that can be the processing place for all that fiber.
Exactly.
And so the town was built. People moved there. It went from, bush to a small town. We have a very proud forest history,
Yes.
but now the government seems to have turned their back. We are there because government wanted that town built. We were built under the Instant Town Act in 1966 to support the industry.
Yeah.
Now our community's getting no support from industry or government right now. I'm quite concerned. We now have our third forest minister in 26 months.
Yeah.
We are, forestry is an industry in crisis right now.
Yeah.
And where's the continuity, the plan when they keep changing who's going to be steering the boat?
Strategy, going forward.
Exactly.
So what I'm saying is this, Joan, is that saying innovative primary, once they start investing again, that's how the primary will look. That the other part of it, what I'm saying, intensive secondary, either done by primaries, because they can do it too, although they're not good at that usually, or by strategic relationships they have with primaries, or by individual companies like us and likely Parallel 55. And then the question then becomes that, and that I've said that over and over again, that part of the intentions paper was threefold. One, to make sure that there is more of the tenure or timber is in the hands of First Nations by law. That is starting to happen, and that's a good thing. The other one is that they will share in the revenue. I say that's a good thing. That there will be deferrals of old growth. That's probably a good thing, but in my mind it has gone too far in some areas. I'm against people knocking over these beautiful, beautiful trees, mainly on the coast and on the island. And I'm not a big fan of that, but it has gone so far that it now has, I think, 2.6 million hectares is classified as old growth, and literally 11 million hectares in the province of British Columbia. 75% of that already is set aside as old growth. And so it has now become, in a lot of cases where down the coast, anything more than 250 years old will be considered to be old growth. And in the interior, everything 150 years and older. And I believe there is a lot of difficulty, and it kind of has upset the allocation of timber to getting of cutting rights and all of that, is that it has gone too far in that direction.
Exactly. And I think that's something that educating the public, when people think old growth, that's exactly what they think is those beautiful big trees in Cathedral Grove. That's not what old growth looks like across this province. And old growth has to be managed, in my mind, the same way as the working forest is managed. And people think, we're going to designate it old growth, so we've kind of made a monument and that's going to stay there forever. No, it's going to get old, sick, fall over, rot, maybe start a forest fire. So it has to be managed. We can't just say, this is old growth. And
old growth will not always stay there. It could be a tree in the interior because it's only that big around. And simply because it's 150 years or more, now it's old growth. No, all of that, the rotation of that is extremely important.
Exactly.
So some of the stakeholder groups, with all due respect to the environmental community, I think they have done a lot of good things, but in some cases it has gone too far, and it has to be brought back to logic in terms of what is right for it, and also considering economic effects that it will have if it goes too far. I'm also against exporting of logs, but I'm also against exporting of lumber that could be further manufactured. And I think it was early in 2000 when, with all due respect to my friends on the BC Liberals, when Gordon Campbell made some very major changes to forest policy. One of them was eliminating appurtency. I didn't agree with that. In spite of the uplift could have been temporary. And there was also, and I was involved in that in the late 90s, early 2000, when I was the chair of the BC Council of Value-Added Wood Processors, to set aside 20% of the AEC aimed at value-added manufacturing, where we could attract capital from outside, and saying, and this comes to the person that approached, or the company that approached Mackenzie, is saying that's the wood that we set aside for value-added manufacturing, so that that it is not realistic to say we want value-added manufacturing. There must be reasonable expectation. I'm not saying tenure forever and ever. Reasonable expectation that credible secondary manufacturers, like Parallel 55 would be one of the Brink would fall in that category, as the ones that are making the commitment, must have reasonable expectation of access to fiber.
Yes.
That was changed then, in the sense that a couple of things happened. Indirectly, by accident, but it is so absurd that I believe that it may well be by design, and I don't want to be, blaming anybody in particular, but that I was very involved in the value-added sector in the province, and was very involved in softwood lumber negotiations. And for the first 3 rounds of negotiations of softwood lumber, I was involved in those. And what we were able to negotiate with Ottawa, the province, and the Americans is that value-added manufacturing should pay no duties, because they have no timber if the allegation is it's subsidized. And I always say the Americans are making the right argument for the wrong reason. Be very frank about it. And then, so what then happened is we would pay on the input value of the price for the raw material, not on the how much value did we add after that, and pay duties on that. That whole thing was not even introduced in Lumber 4. So since 2017, companies like us have paid $60 million in duties that we should never have paid. And that was simply because they claimed they didn't know, but I cannot believe that. But we were not part then of the negotiation, neither was the value-added sector. It was 10 companies, most of them the big 5 and the 5 other ones that have this exclusive group of the BC Lumber Trade Council that were negotiating the softwood lumber agreement. And by accident forgot to include the value-added sector.
Right.
Although the value-added sector is not part of that and will not be allowed to be part of that. So,
although that's what government, the BC government, is telling us what they want to see, but they have to facilitate that. They're the only ones that can make that happen.
Now the other part, Joan, that is the one part. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. The BC government was aware of that, and should have been aware of that, and did not do that. Destroyed a lot of value-added companies in the province, taking away the small business program. That was the other one. They took then the small business program and made it BCTS, which meant that it was no longer exclusively available to value-added manufacturers that had to have reasonable expectations of access to fiber. It was then put on the open market, where the companies that controlled already 75%.
With the deep pockets.
Yeah, and not only that part, but they could bid for whatever they wanted.
Exactly.
Because if that's what you had to survive on, the incremental wood, if you already have 70, 60, 70% of the timber that you need secured at a much lower cost, to add the other 20% would all be kind of washed out over the other. No problem, right?
Exactly.
So that.
And my understanding is you've been working hard to get a portion of that BCTS wood available.
But I'm saying, Joan, it didn't belong to there where it is. It was negotiated years ago, and it was part of the what they call CAD2, secondary
Yes,
manufacturing
yeah.
sector, to attract investment. And BCGS was just a way of skillful manipulation by other stakeholders that they got it put into what they call CAD1, so anybody can bid on it.
Yes, exactly.
And so it's manipulated into.
So if you're a small local
there
manufacturer,
is no way you have.
competing against a big multinational
Now,
company?
add to that one more thing that is horrible, that even to imagine it, then saying that we should be able to buy lumber, or for low-grade lumber in our particular case, or some other cases, but it could also be high-grade lumber, that again, the BC Lumber Trade Council found ways in which they've got money from the federal government, provincial government, to set up markets in China in particular, or in Asia, but China in particular, already in the early 2000s. And that sounds like very good. The Chinese, with all due respect, are not building houses like we do. Mm-hmm. That's not going to happen. So, and they are bottom feeders, so they importing all the low grades, and all of a sudden the low grades that used to be remanufactured in the province of British Columbia are no longer available to the secondary manufacturers. In fact, it went so far, and a lot of people don't even know that, it went so far that in order to make sure that if the majors or the primaries did not find the local buyers of low grades or wholesalers to compete with them in China, they raised the prices at least 20 or 25% for low grades in British Columbia than the price they would be paying for the Chinese. Mm-hmm. Add all of those together and then wonder, why are there no secondary manufacturing plants? For all intents and purposes, there are virtually in the interior of the province. I would think that at most maybe 10 secondary manufacturers, where there used to be many, many more. Northern BC alone, 50. If we made sure that there would be a policy of saying that we should add, wherever we can, add further manufacturing to the raw material source that we have here, lumber or others for that matter, do it here. For lumber alone in the province, and doing low-grade remanufacturing in the province would create 10 to 20,000 jobs, no question about that.
Right.
If we did the same with the higher grades, that do as much of the remanufacturing or further manufacturing here, would add another 10 or 20,000 jobs. That would double the employment on the forest industry in British Columbia.
Do you think the government will recognize and accommodate that?
That's the question, right? So I'm the only voice. If I've been in all the meetings virtually, with the primaries and with secondaries, and then there's virtually nobody left in the secondary manufacturing sector. So they have somebody working out of the Vancouver area. In the interior, I'm the only one that is speaking up. And in the interior, north of Hope for all intents and purposes, or north of Williams Lake, that's where 90% of the timber is. Mm-hmm. And we have really no voices for secondary manufacturing.
So, and again, that's the frustration is, we know what has to be done. Government has to be the people to facilitate that. They're saying we need more value, no longer volume, it's value. But they're not doing their part to make that happen. And it's not going to happen until they do.
No, and it is a question of, do they have the guts to do it and stand up and saying, this is what will have to happen. So far, Joan, I have not seen that, and I've been fairly vocal about it. And my friends at the Council of Forest Industry are not going to like me much for this, but right now the Council of Forest Industry is not, the senior people are not negotiating with the value-added sector. So they will put something together which will result in maintaining the status quo.
Right.
And I believe, that the objective of the primary sector is to maintain the status quo at all costs. In fact, the first meeting that we were at, one of the key individuals of the Big 5 or 6 basically said, they will not get my timber, they will not tell me or us where we can sell our lumber at whatever price. So that's our position. So what do you want to talk about? More or less?
Yeah, exactly.
And they kind of had to scramble then and say, well, that probably was not the right thing to say, but that's what is on the record.
When government, and again, it was the right thing to do, talk to the stakeholders in the province, the people who know the business, people who work in it. Elected officials don't work in the forest industry. They're elected officials. The people, yourself, the people on the ground in the bush, the loggers, they work in the industry. So when they had the interior forest sector renewal process in 2019 and 2020, the number one recommendation was redistribution of tenure. Too few have too much control over the forests. We like to say the forests belong to the people of this province. Well, that might be true on paper, but in reality, those 5 or 6 big companies drive the industry. So government knows what has to be done. They brought in legislation a year ago, that they can take back tenure, but they have legislation. They haven't developed, to my knowledge, any regulations to actually put that into action. So, we've been talking, identifying what are the issues, what do we have to do to fix them. We've had those conversations. Now it's time to put those recommendations into action.
So what I did is a couple of programs, where I had Bob Schutz, BC Forest Industry and Transition, and some of the experts. Having you here as a community leader and a leader in Northern British Columbia that speaks out about the issues, is familiar with the issues, and brings them forward is a step forward. So what I like to see is that to my friends, the major primaries that are watching these segments, no question about it, I say to them, that, as I said before, that once they feel that, and I agree with them on certain things, that because of bureaucracy around the forest industry and the Ministry of Forest, the stumpage system that we have is broken. It should be changed, it should be fixed. Much more effective in Alberta than it is here. It has nothing to do with how much money we pay, but it's just the bureaucracy doesn't work. It doesn't help in allocation of timber. The way getting timber permits for harvesting is broken and needs to be fixed.
Right.
The other one is that the old growth deferral, I agree to a certain extent, but the understanding is to a lot of people that only affects big trees. It doesn't. We are doing a very good job in terms of preserving old growth. Already of the 11 million hectares, we are already preserving 75%. That does not mean there should be some other, but now it has gone too far where we are preserving any timber over 150 years old growth, and it paralyzed the system as to where it is now. Right. It makes it very difficult for the companies to operate it. I give them all of that. But on the other hand, what I'm saying is that if the industry or it's consolidated now to the point that there is really a question of, is this good for the province? And the answer is no. And that if they are, with all due respect, I take the liberty to say that if I was on their board, then I would say the time has come for us to recognize that we are changing. You know, and because the public will demand it, and you know, and that's where, and the sun is shining on value-added manufacturing, and this will not go away with you or me. This will continue until change. Now is the time to be proactive.
Exactly, and if you look at the Mackenzie timber supply area in particular, we know that there is lots of wood up there.
Yeah.
We also know Mackenzie has been the graveyard for many forestry companies.
Correct.
They've come and gone and come and gone because, and I've heard this dozens of times, it's way more expensive when you're hauling logs 300 kilometers on a gravel road.
Yeah.
And that has to be recognized. So government has to realize they have to play a part in this, because
I agree
lower
with you.
stumpage is better than no stumpage, because nobody wants to log up there because it's too expensive.
I agree with you 100%, and that the government is a partner in that. And if the wood was closer in terms of from a cost perspective, then everything would change. And then it brings me to another one that is, you know, one of the things that, you know, has always been something that has immensely troubled me, is we should have never sold BC Rail and or given it away, and we did. So that then being said, maybe now the time has come to say to BC Rail or to CN, you know, you got lots of problems already managing up to Prince George, make that the hub, and let's take the lines that go to Fort Nelson on the one side, to Takla on the other side, and further expand those and make that part of our transportation system to bring logs and to market and potential other resources.
Exactly.
That would help. CN doesn't really want those lines, I don't believe, because they have lots of trouble with these other ones already. And take them from, and I've not said that too publicly before, but yeah, I believe that's
You look at the community at Taylor right now, the Canfor pulp mill, they've been down since February.
Yeah.
Why? They can't move their product out of their yard
Yeah.
because CN Rail's not providing them with the service that they need.
Here we have over 100 carloads in our yard, can't get them out.
Yeah.
You know, so what I'm saying is that in our discussion, what I would say is to stop the CN and then manage. They can still own it if they want to, whatever, you know, in some form, but manage that in a different way, and then make government a stakeholder, a partner.
Right.
And how do we make our industry competitive globally and do it together? It's not
exactly.
them and us.
Yes.
It's not going to work.
What's good for companies is good for the province.
Exactly. And everybody knows that there is our cost area, you know, like, and I don't blame Canfor in a way, and you know, and you know, the or others saying that they cannot afford to operate in Mackenzie because their log cost is too high.
Then
and
give
the same
up your
with Ken
tenure
Shell.
if you're not going to operate in Mackenzie.
And that's the other part about it, right? Or sell it.
Yeah.
You know, and I've said to them, I would gladly buy it because I would set up a mill there. Huge potential, you know, and but you know, but I believe that in terms of the intentions paper, which is supposing it has all the tools available to them to make changes.
Right.
Now is the time.
But get on with it.
But what has to happen, Joan, is that people like you in the northern communities have to become directly involved with stakeholders like the ones in your communities, the ones here that are willing to speak up and stand up and saying, it's now time,
Right,
you know,
right.
that, you know, why are we sending low-grade lumber to China and then have the companies here that would like to buy it, have them pay 20% more because you're scared that if you pay the same price here, then you're going to compete with them in China. That's gone on for 20 years. Everybody knows it in the industry, but nobody says anything
Right.
about it. I'm probably the only one. And then on the other hand, you know, if you want to invest elsewhere, then reconsider the tenure system as it is today. but also look at the stumpage system that's broken, and then with all that beautiful timber north in the interior of the province and in northern British Columbia that is too expensive to bring to market, while the government is part of a stakeholder
Exactly.
and should be a partner in
Yeah.
that to make sure that that is viable and competitive.
I agree 100%.
But I believe that so with the guest that I had before, with Rob Schutz, amazing expert in the field of reforestation. James Avant, same thing, an expert in his field, and the concern about what I have a lot of people asking me is, how is the future? Do we have a sound forest, working forest in British Columbia? And the answer clearly from them is yes, we have.
Right.
It is sustainable. It will be carefully.
That's why we have timber supply reviews, to make sure they are sustainable.
Yeah, and every 5 years it is being evaluated to make sure we're not overcutting, or can we cut more.
Yeah.
So that is there. The quality of the timber is there. We have the infrastructure between rail, road, not functioning necessarily the way they should. Everything is there. The location of our province in regards to global markets close to the United States, China, and Europe and then the other part that I feel very strongly about while we are talking is that I was quite involved with the College of New Caledonia for many years, and and same as UNBC. And that, when, must be 25 years ago, that I donated to buying the building there and creating the Trades and Technology Center, and my name is on it, and I'm honored by that. But what I've said is that when I made that presentation, I said, it's not the resource. We have the best in the world. It's not the location. We have the best location. China, United States, Europe. We have infrastructure, roads, air, rail in place. We have building entrepreneurs that are ready to come here and to invest. Dollars are available. The deterrent is having a skilled workforce. And unless and until we start investing in what I say a center of excellence in combination with UNBC and the College of New Caledonia, then that's where we must invest in. With all due respect to my friends down south, they just donated $2.5 million to BCIT, who is building a $220 million addition to BCIT. I think the time has come to invest that money here in northern BC,
where the majority of the industry is.
Yeah,
exactly.
And where probably 80% of the gross domestic product of BC is coming from the interior of BC. And I've said it to these guys, hey guys, wake up, So, and that's because, the same with First Nations, and, I applaud them for doing what they are doing. And as they become involved in the industry, we have to be able to train them, because if we are giving them timber and not the skill sets that they require for their people to work with, then...
Again, Mackenzie is in a unique advantage that our two largest logging contractors in our timber supply area are McLeod Lake Indian Band, who own Duzcho, and Seke Dene, that own Chucho. So those two nations have the capacity, but that's not the same across the province. And I know there are some mayors in small communities that think their timber supply area is going to be, it's going to just be selling of logs to go elsewhere. And we all want the logs in our areas to be processed in our areas. That's why our communities are there. So I'm very
lumber.
grateful. I'm very grateful that the Indigenous nations, particularly McLeod Lake and Seke Dene and Quaracha, they are already involved in the industry.
Yeah.
That they know what they're doing. They have successful companies, so
Yeah.
I think it's it will
example.
bode well moving forward. That they'll be able to take that tenure that they have and manage it properly, support our community,
and maybe go into manufacturing, not just lumber, but also value-added products.
Exactly.
That's where I want to see them go. Is saying, what else can we do together? And that means, how do we develop the skill sets?
Right.
And so what I would like to see is really, talk to communities and the people in general, like what we did with UNBC. It was all of Northern BC that came together and say, we want a freestanding university
Right.
in Northern British Columbia. It took a lot of effort, but it's there now, and it's amazing. Most of the people that are being trained there are working here in Northern British Columbia.
Exactly.
The same has to happen with the Center of Excellence, and it kind of, bothered me somewhat that when I saw this week that the forest companies, all of the major ones, together donated $2.5 million to get a $220 million investment in BCIT. I donated here to the Trade and Technology Center $1 million on my own, and nothing has happened. How much does it take? And it takes the people standing up and saying, that must change.
Right.
So what I'm saying to you, and you vocal, and I agree with you 100%, and I've admired you for standing up and challenging the status quo, is saying that I believe the communities have to get together even more so, rallying the people around it and saying, enough already. Now's the time. Let the intentions paper be the document, and let's move forward to where are we going, because
a little quicker.
with the premier gone, John Oregon, unfortunately, and then Catherine Conroy also now being in finance. I want to know what happened to it, because for now it's just the Council of Forest Industry, a couple of their bureaucrats inside the Council of Forest Industry trying to negotiate with a couple of value-added manufacturers that represent mainly the coast and the Kootenays, but nobody from the interior, for all intents and purposes, is involved. I'm kind of trying to do my best, but I'm not part of the direct discussion.
Right.
So it kind of feels like, the government said, well, let's get Kofi to do it, and that's just kind of like sending the fox to count the chickens, they will maintain the status quo.
And I am very saddened to see John Horgan leave.
Me too.
Because I think he had personal health issues that he had to deal with, and I respect his decision, but he was moving forward to move this industry forward because he recognized the value. And I don't know David Eby that well, and I know he's comes from a background that takes care of people, and we realize the challenges in the Lower Mainland with homelessness and addictions and all the support services that are needed. So I understand that that's going to be a major focus for the sitting government right now, to take care of those people who can't take care of themselves. But as resource communities, we have a huge part to play in that, because if we can be operating and running successful manufacturing in our communities, whether it's primary or value added, we will be adding to the purse strings to help those people. So we have a big role to play. So our concerns have to be heard so that we are successful in what we are doing, because that's going to make our government successful in delivering all these social programs that are needed.
No question about that, Joe. So the message is simply that, at least from my perspective, is that yes, the forest, we have a future in the forest industry, no question about
Yes.
it. There is no country in the world that grows better fiber than we do. And, but the opportunities are, I saw a graph actually, it was the BC Liberals that did it in one of their documents that showed the different countries in the world that are manufacturing lumber and value-added projects. We were the second one from the bottom. That should not happen. We should be on the top, at least moving in that direction. And I believe that communities should stand up and saying, no longer, you are one of the strong voices. I would like to see more and more doing that, and then offering solutions like, if the timber in the north is not competitive, then let government make it competitive.
Exactly.
Because they are part of the
Yes.
The economic viability of northern British Columbia.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's the way I feel about it. So So I very much enjoyed my conversation with you, and anything else that comes to mind that.
I just want to thank you for letting me have the opportunity to talk with you, because I think the more talking and the more educating that we can do to the people who don't really understand this industry, people say, oh, it's a sunset industry. I've had elected officials say that to me, and I'm thinking, no, it's not. No. We are in a transition now. We're in a pretty low point because of forest health issues and wildfires, but we know we plant more than we harvest, so things are going to get better. Maybe not in my lifetime that things will be way better, but we are moving towards that.
But we heard from our last experts that we had here, both Rob Schutz and Jim Vergen, is saying that, that in the next 40, 50 years from now, which sounds like a long time in our lifetimes, but not in terms of a forest, is that not only will we, the way we are growing the fiber now, we're planting for every tree that comes down, at least 3 Rob Schutz sets, if not more than that. And the way we are managing the forest now, with very little effort really to get it back to free to grow. The likelihood is 40, 50 years from now, we will not be at 60 million cubic meters annually, but moving towards 90 million. So the industry will be double the size as we look forward.
And then that brings up the other question that I guess could be a conversation all on its own. Are we better to have area-based tenures or volume-based tenures? And I think what I've heard from people directly involved in the industry, foresters, area-based tenures, that's yours, so you're going to, it's like if you're renting an apartment or if you own a home, which are you going to invest more money into? Yeah.
And a good example of that, again, is, and I agree with you, is that if it is volume-based, then you have no loyalty to a certain area.
Exactly. Why would you?
Yeah. And a good example of that would be Dunkley's, that at one point got a tree farm license of about 80,000 cubic meters, which is not a whole lot, but they doubled or tripled it in size in a very short period of time.
By intense management.
Correct. Yeah. And so, but it is, I don't know, but a mixture of those is probably something that would make sense, to
because right now we rely on our community forests now. Yeah. We lost last year in 2022. We were short $800,000 in industrial tax because of the Paper Excellence closure. Yeah. So this year, our community forest, our dividend. We were owned by Mackenzie and McLeod Lake Indian Band. We each got a dividend of $350,000. Sometimes we each get $500,000 a year. Yeah. And that goes a long way when your major industry is shutting down in your community. Exactly. So I'm a strong supporter of community forests also.
I agree with that. Yeah. So, Joan, it was my pleasure.
Yes. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, thank you.